I know that we live in a generation where we have haters and everyone else is the bad guy and we're always the victim and we have to overcome what people have done to us. But here's the reality, is that we have all been the villain in someone's story. And if you don't know the way that you can be harmful, that you get tired and you get mean, that you get stressed and you start getting lazy, like if you don't take into account the ways that you lack empathy, the ways that you think everyone else should just have to survive because you had to survive and no one gave you a hand up. If you don't realize the way that you show up in a harmful way, then you do not know how your ability to engage with other people can be harmful or helpful. You got to know that you're going to do some things that are harmful. And when you can own that without making you feel like a bad person or that you're just so negative, I'll just be by myself, then you get to show people that like, hey, I'm not going to do everything perfectly, but when I see that I've been harmful, you can also expect that I will change and I will make every effort to do things differently in the future. So power is not about perfection. It's about full ownership of your good and your bad, of your beautiful and your complicated. And that full ownership is what makes you a force. You're a force when you can say, I can fail and get back up again because failure doesn't define me. I can win without winning making me arrogant because I recognize that I only won by the grace of God. Like I can move in power because I recognize the full expression of who I am.
Do you mind taking me back to that moment? You shared the story before, but I would love for you to share it again because I've got a follow-up question. So this is when your ex is with, or you're dating him, and there's a woman over.
Okay, we were actually married, and I was, cooking dinner, trying to perform again. Like I'm cooking this dinner. The marriage wasn't good. We never really had a really solid space, but I'm still like, I will pretend my way through this, block my eyes out and just keep it trucking. And so I'm trying to create this white picket fence dinner of a moment. And I think he was sitting down with the kids and I looked and I realized his car wasn't outside where it was usually parked. I kind of like peeked out the window discreetly and I saw the car was running about a block down the road. And so I like creeped outside while they were eating. I walk up to the car. There's a woman in the car. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, we're kicking it. I was like, what are you doing with my husband? She said, we're kicking it. And I was like, kicking it? Excuse me? And so I go back to my house and I hop into my car and I just start ramming the car over and over again. By then, my ex-husband at the time, he comes outside. He's like, oh my gosh. He hops in the car. He's trying to drive off. I blocked the car. They call the police on me. The officer comes up to me. He's like, what seems to be the problem here, ma'am? I'm like, well, my husband brought his girlfriend to the house. I had a problem with that. He was like, I see how that could be an issue. I'm gonna go talk to them. And I was like, go talk to them. And he was like, I'm not gonna arrest you. I'm gonna write you a ticket though. You're gonna have to go see CPS because I need to make sure that the children are in a safe environment. And I'm gonna let this go. It'll be on them whether or not they press charges.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. I've got a follow-up question now.
Okay.
If you could go back, so you sitting here in your power, having done all the power moves, if you could go back to that Sarah who felt powerless, what advice would you give her and what would you do differently?
Oh, I would have still rammed the cars.
Oh my God, I love that. I did not expect that answer. I expected a really I would do
Oh,
this.
no, I wouldn't.
But actually, so let me know.
Let me tell you why.
Please.
Because, I mean, sure, I love God, I'm a Christian, all of these things, but I think it taught me that I could really lose it in a way that would make me lose my children and end up in prison. Like, I did not know how quick it is for you to lose yourself. I wouldn't change anything about that moment. Like one of the things that our teams at Woman Evolve, we're constantly working on ways that we can serve women who are experiencing incarceration because I really feel like I was literally one more situation from being in prison. Because I was like, there was nothing you could do to stop me. And it is literally by the grace of God that nobody ended up injured or hurt because at that moment, it was anything could happen. And so it taught me what was in me, how toxic it was, how bad it was, how black it was inside of me. And I don't know that I would change that.
Okay, so let's assume, so the lesson of it was so powerful that you wouldn't change it.
Yeah.
Let's say you learn the lesson. Going back to that moment, what would you have told yourself? Assuming that you would learn the lesson anyway. take us through them building that power in that moment where we can really lose our shit and be completely powerless.
I would say that it is okay for this to fail. I was so afraid of experiencing another failure, another mark on my reputation, that I felt like I have to fight for this like it's life or death. And I think that I would say to myself in that moment that your pride is keeping you from truly seeing that this is never going to work, that it's like literally never going to work. And until you accept that this is never going to work, then you're never going to meet the version of you that does work. Like, this is divinely a mess. Like, there are some things that are just divinely a mess. Like, this is not meant to work. And so it is always going to fall apart. Like, it's not just the cheating. It's not just that you're away from home. Like, this is not meant to work. And if you can accept that this is not meant to work, you can then figure out, how do I make myself work outside of this relationship, outside of this job, outside of this experience? How do I focus on making myself work? I think I needed something to distract me from what wasn't working inside of me. When I got pregnant at 13, I just felt broken forever. Like, I grew up in purity culture. Like, there were so many different layers to what it meant to be pregnant as a teenager, as a pastor's daughter, as the pastor's daughter. Yeah, there were so many layers to like why this has damaged me forever. And what I know now is like restoration is real. And restoration is not always that my life goes back to looking like what it was before this happened. Restoration is when my spirit returns to what it was before this happened. Sometimes we sell people on restoration and they're like, I'm never going to get the time back. I'm never going to get the kid back. Like, there's no way this can be restored. Restoration isn't about getting the things or the people back or the life back that you once had. Restoration is about getting your soul back to a place of hope, of joy, of love, of kindness. And I needed restoration that had nothing to do with pretending I didn't have a child or trying to pretend that I had this perfect picture little life. I needed the kind of restoration that says this 13-year-old girl who got pregnant, who dropped out of college, who waitressed at this strip club, found joy. She found peace. She found confidence. She found power. Her soul has been restored. And what I believe women need more than anything is not necessarily to have this multi-million, billion-dollar business. It's not to have this perfect Prince Charming or the right friends or to travel the world, because you can have all of those things and still have a broken soul. What we need more than anything is to get to a place where our soul has been restored. And from that place of spirit restoration, everything else flows. We find peace in what we do have. We still can imagine what things could be like, and then sometimes take the steps to actually walk into that, but it doesn't happen with pressure, because our spirit, we have a spirit for what is around us and for what is behind us and for what is possible for us as well.
Wow, I love the idea of the restoration. That's so beautiful. How do you make sure that, because you even said what's behind us, how do we make sure that sometimes we don't carry all the things that are behind us into our future when they don't serve us?
I love that you said when they don't serve us, because I very much so carry all of who I am into where I am. Like, had I not ran them cards, like my husband, my amazing husband, he like knows I'm crazy. He's like, don't push her buttons, because I carried some of that crazy with me. But
and when you say crazy, you mean like a trigger?
The trigger, yes. But how do we get to a space where we're able to let go of what no longer serves us? It comes down to compassion. I had to find a way to have compassion, not anger, for who I once was. So it used to be when I thought about getting pregnant at 13 years old that I was like, you're nasty, you're dirty, like you're such a bad girl. No one's ever gonna want you. Like, how could you be so dumb? Like it just all of these negative thoughts. But when I started to look at that girl through a lens of compassion, I recognized that I was lonely, I was afraid, I was isolated. In some moments, I was really angry at how quickly my parents' ministry had grown and how I felt lost in the midst of it. I didn't have a relationship with God, so I didn't feel like I was one of the girls who got it. And so there was a lot of desire, a lot of anger built up in my body at 13 years old. And so I could choose to carry the shame of that moment, the embarrassment of that moment, or the reality that when I feel isolated, when I feel rejected, when I feel alone, that I am willing to do anything to satisfy the pain that is within me. And because I carry that lesson that I learned through compassion with me, it helps me to be compassionate with myself when I'm beginning to feel isolated, rejected, abandoned, alone as a 35-year-old woman. And so I believe it really comes down to understanding the most powerful narrative, not the most destructive one. So when you look back on your life and you see what you've gone through, if there are only two buckets for your narrative and one gives you power and one further destroys you, you have to choose what bucket you're going to see your story through. And it is most powerful when we choose to see it through the bucket that requires compassion, empathy, forgiveness, as opposed to the one that requires us to constantly destroy that version of who we are so that we feel good about where we are now. One of the things I wrote in the book, people always say the only person I'm better than is the person I was yesterday. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Sometimes I was better yesterday. Like that was a better version of who I am because today I'm struggling and I'm okay with that because I recognize that life is a journey. I don't want to have to destroy who I was yesterday to build who I am today. I want to believe that I can embrace all of who I am because I need all of who I am to really affect what is in front of me today. And I'm here to cause and affect something in the earth.
God, that was so short. When I read that in your book, I was like, oh my, because I love those shift moments, those moments where I think one way and then something shifts inside me and like doors open and, like the angels start singing. And when I read that, I actually found that super powerful because I was the person that was always like, well, as long as I'm better today, and not realizing, because language matters. Yeah. The words you use, the phrases you're saying to yourself matter. It absolutely impacts how you show up the next day. I think of it as like water dripping on the stone. It eventually starts to take its shape. Yeah. And so if the word is a toxic word, or if your idea of who you used to be becomes toxic, that dripping on you over time, the shape of your belief of who you are starts to change. So that idea of, hang on a minute, but today you may be tired and now you're going to beat yourself up emotionally, judge yourself for it instead of saying, no, it's actually okay. Yesterday I was better. Dude, it freaking hit me for 6 when you said that. So I really love that idea because I look at the moments of that are holding us back. Yeah. And I think that it can be powerful in a way, because I used to use it as a way to not compare myself to other people. So that was why I started to use it, because I'm like, instead of comparing yourself to that person who's got 10 years ahead of you, they've already been doing it for so many years. Why would you think you would be as good as them if you haven't practiced as much as them? So I would then shift my mindset to say, okay, how did you show up? Yeah. So it was empowering to go from that negative to the positive, but now there's this new evolution to this idea, which is stop even judging this version of you yesterday, because maybe you are struggling with something today that you didn't.
And if I can figure out why can't I show up the way that I was yesterday in my most powerful form, what happened along the way? Maybe I'm carrying it. Maybe it was negative. Maybe I haven't processed it. Maybe me showing up today is rest. Maybe I need to change my definition of power for today. Yesterday, power was me boxing and working out and taking 18 business meetings. Today's power is in me resting. And if I'm constantly comparing who I was yesterday to who I am today, then I don't get to ask myself, but what do you need today? Because what you need today and what you can do today is how we will define power for today. And then we'll ask the next question for tomorrow. But I don't want to be held hostage to who other people think I need to be or who I was yesterday. I want to live present in this moment and to be at one within myself in a way that allows me to bring all of we're talking about power, to bring all of my power into what is in front of me.
And as I was thinking before we started rolling, we were talking about our age and I was telling you about my hormones and things like that. And now I think about even that. It's like in your 40s and 50s, you're not going to be the same as you were in your 20s. So if you're comparing your earlier self to now, well, maybe you are struggling more. Maybe your hormones are out of whack.
Absolutely. There are any number of things that keep us from being able to be who we were yesterday. And the only reason why I wanted to poke holes in that is because when you think about it too much in that way, you begin to feel discouraged because at a certain point yesterday was last year. You know what I mean? That was 6 years ago. And then you start to grieve this idea that maybe my better days are behind me. Maybe I'll never be able to access that version of who I am, not allowing that version of who you were to just be released so that you can figure out what's possible for today. And then when you see what's possible for today, you're like, hey, you know, there are all of these different variables that I didn't have then. And now that I have them, I have to define what does success look like now, because it may not be able to be what it was then.
Yeah, God, that's so powerful. Okay, so talking about poking holes, you also talk about power leaks.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, Len, what are the power leaks that we can start to watch out for? Because as you're starting to build your power, your confidence, your self-worth, we've got to make sure that we're not then leaking in places that we may not even realize.
They're paper cuts, right? There's a saying, death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so most of us think about the moments when we've lost power as like maybe there was a big breakup, there was a loss, a transition, and we're like, these are those big power loss moments. But the reality is that there are small ways that we give our power away without even realizing it. That may be spending too much time on social media. It could be little small things that we allow to pass in our relationships that ultimately become big things. Like anyone who's been in a relationship knows that there's this moment where like now we're having a blow up, not just because you left the dishes out, but because X, Y, and Z happened along the way that I never said anything about, not realizing that had I said something in the beginning, that there could have been a course correction that wouldn't have allowed things to blow up into something so big. And so the more that we can patch those small holes along the way, the less likely we are to experience power leaks. And so I like people to, in the book, there's a practice where we're like, let's go throughout the day and think about those moments where a little bit of power leaked, where you felt yourself not able to be fully authentic or giving someone a pass when you really didn't want to. And listen, I'm not the person that's like, now we got to call out everybody who does anything to us. But we do have to be willing to reconcile at the end of the day. Okay, woo, that drained me a little bit more than I anticipated. Like, whoo, that costs a little bit much. Why do I need to reconcile that? Because I need to be able to ask myself, how do I restore what has been leaked away? Maybe I need to go up to bed a little bit earlier. Maybe I need to modify my day. But if we just allow these small power leaks to become a part of our day to day, sometimes we end up depleted and we don't even know why. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I feel the way that I feel. Nothing big has really happened. No, because lots of small things have become big things that have now made you feel so small in a world where you were once okay taking up space.
So things like you say yes when you really meant no.
For sure. And it seems like it's small, but you say yes anyway. You do something that you agree to something that doesn't necessarily align with your true beliefs. You allow people to push you in a direction that is not necessarily congruent with what you believe. You see something on social media that you internalize as something that is targeted towards you or something that makes you question your ability to show up in the space that you're in. There are any number of things, right, that can play a role in that. You saw someone working out at the gym and they were doing such a better job than you, and you've spent the day thinking that I should just fall off the train altogether. Like, these are small power leaks, and we catch them not necessarily by telling that person, okay, well, I'm going to come to the gym at a different time. I'm going to make sure that I stop the comparison that made me believe that I needed to look the way that they look. Like, we got to be willing to engage with ourselves in those moments moments where power is leaking from us, and when applicable, being willing to have tough conversations with people so that they can also stop poking those holes as well.
I start thinking about, like the last straw that broke the camel's back, right? And so many of us women will just take more on, put the weight on, like more on our shoulders. And eventually it's like, yes, the pressure and the weight on your shoulders will break you. So I'm always thinking, how do I make sure I don't get to that stage? How do I spot it when the third straw has been put on, right? And so thinking through, okay, maybe doing an assessment of my day, where were those moments of power leaks that I can then start to block them, I think is such a beautiful way to then not have to do 10 years of work.
Yeah.
Because that can be overwhelming,
For
right?
sure.
When you've got 10 years of all these things that you've, stacked up, just doing it day by day and blocking those leaks, I absolutely love. Talk to me about the dark side to power. I actually have a quote of yours. You said, power without accountability will always turn to abuse.
Part of the reason why I believe women have been so kind of adverse to wanting to be powerful or wanting to even be in positions of power is because we've seen so many moments where people had power and they had arrogance and they had no accountability. And as a result of it, we don't want to become that. So we avoid power altogether. The dark side of power is when we are setting our own rules, setting our own standards without having any type of accountability. For me, of course, I have accountability in my relationships, in my friendships, whether it's with my husband or with my parents or siblings. There's a level of accountability there. And I exercise that accountability by asking the types of questions that give them permission to be honest with me about the way that I'm showing up.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So I may ask my husband, when I said that, did it feel dishonoring? Like when I said that, did I have an attitude? Or I'm sorry, I've been really stressed today. So if I said something that made you feel like I wasn't being present or I wasn't paying attention when you were talking, that's because X, Y, Z is happening. And then he may tell me. My husband, I will tell you, he doesn't need a lot of permission to tell me. He's pretty vocal about the areas where it's like, hey, are you here? Are you listening? But there's something interesting when you ask your children that, because power, my husband and I are equal within our power dynamic. But with my children, where there is an offset with the power dynamic, or with my team where there is a power dynamic, to be able to ask like, hey, are you comfortable? Do you need anything? Is there something that I can do better? Allows for them to tell me that there is an opportunity for me to grow. But you never discover that if you aren't asking those types of questions. What do I miss? Do you think this is the best idea? Do you like the run of show that we've put together? Asking those questions instead of just being a tyrant with your power is how we have accountability and humility while also maintaining the power that's been given to us. I'm obviously a woman of faith, and so prayer is really important to me. Being able to center myself and not just go to God with my list of things that I need him to do, but to experience God's presence and my life through his presence. So was I an image of God, a reflection of God in all that I did today? If God was standing in the room, as I believe that he was, but sometimes I act like he's not, would I be able to get into heaven? Like, is my ticket going to scan? Like, if he scanned my ticket right now, is your girl getting behind those gates? And sometimes the answer is a very strong no, And so then I know in those moments that, like, I exercise the power that doesn't align with God's power in my life. And I hold myself accountable to recognizing that my power is on loan. There's nothing that God has given me in my life that has not come by God's power. And so if I mishandle God's power, I don't ask God for more of it. I shouldn't expect to receive more of it because I have mishandled and misused the power and influence God has given me. And so my goal is to get to a place where when my time on earth is done, where God's able to say to me, well done, my good and faithful servant, that you were good and faithful as it related to being a vessel of my power. Not just when people were looking, not just when cameras were on, but when you were working with people behind the scenes, when you were raising these children, when you were loving the people who I put in your circle of influence. And so we have to surrender and make ourselves open to that level of accountability. But that's how we can trust that power is ours to serve and not to control.
Oh my God, it's so powerful in thinking like that because you're always looking for that improvement, that moment of like, how do I get better, instead of like, was I perfect? Was I, and I think that that's a beautiful way to think, because you're always thinking forward, how do I grow and how do I change? For me, it almost like feels like a big North Star for you. It's like, okay, anytime that I'm feeling lost, anytime something happening, let me go here and ask God. And then if that's a good reflection, then I'll get, the keys into the gates, as you will. For me, it's, how do I feel about myself at night when I'm by myself? Can I actually say, I'm proud of you today, Lisa?
Yeah.
And if I can't say I'm proud of you today, Lisa, then I have to assess why.
Why?
And then I have to assess those moments of why. Is it an old belief, or is it actually a current thing that I do need to change? Because the old belief may be, well, you said no to this person and they were disappointed. And it's like, yeah, but I had to say no for my own self-care. And then I can go, okay, that was an old belief, so I can, I'm actually proud of myself. Versus, you know what, you're a little dismissive of that person today, and that's why I don't feel like I can completely be proud of myself right now. It's like, okay, well, you can just do better tomorrow. What will you do differently tomorrow? And I used to spiral. That voice in my head of like, oh my God, here you are again. I can't believe that you're no good. I told you, you shouldn't have done that, blah, blah, blah. And so now I'm that idea is actually breaking me down instead of allowing me to build. And I think you say in your book, for every breakthrough, you need the breakdown.
Yeah, for sure. You know what I love about what you said about even if you were dismissive to someone, like to me, true power is then being able to go to that person yesterday, like, you know what, I think I may have been dismissive. I was in the middle of doing X, Y, and Z, because it's one thing to hold yourself accountable and be like, okay, I won't do that again, but there's something else to be able to fix what you did yesterday. And to me, that is powerful, because it teaches people that you can trust me with you, right? So in a marriage, oh my gosh, we can sometimes get so caught up in our rhythm that we're talking to one another. Like I may talk to him like he's one of my team members or one of the children, and he may do the same, but it's not necessarily that that won't happen again. But what I can trust is that when it does happen, that you will recognize it, apologize for it, and become more sensitive to it when there's a possibility of it happening again. I will say that I really believe my husband is like the master of that, because if something happens and I'm like, ooh, that was a little spicy, and we're like in the neighborhood of spicy, and he'll be like, was that a little spicy? I was like, no, it wasn't spicy, but thank you for asking, because now you're sensitive to something that I vocalized affected me in the past.
And it's also putting you in a position like, you're not perfect.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And when you can accept that you're not perfect, you're more willing to forgive and apologize and mess up. And this is not about getting a license to do whatever, because we're constantly, like I said, stretching for more. But when we have a breakdown in the stretch, we're able to own that and then try again. And that's important to the human experience.
Why do you think women perceive power as a whole, just potentially like bad, if you will? Because I love that you called your book Power Moves. I love that this entire interview is about how women gain their power. But there's a lot of women that perceive the word power as being negative.
Well, I believe that's got a lot to do with the systems of patriarchy that have made us believe that we will not handle power properly, or that we are not deserving of power, we're too emotional. And so we have a negative connotation about how we handle power. The problem with that, even biblically, right, and I know not everyone's a believer, is that when God created creation and he made man and woman, he gave them power. He gave them dominion and authority. It was never supposed to be this hierarchy. Sin entered the world, and now there's this hierarchy and patriarchy. But God's original intention was for man and woman to both walk in power, to release that power, to be fruitful and multiply, to be co-laborers. And so we were supposed to hold power. Now, Eve in the garden, she did some things. And now there are mindsets that make us believe that we are better left seen and not heard. I am on a mission to help women understand that your power doesn't have to look like the power that has been celebrated in cultures and industries, in order for it to be as potent and effective in introducing change in the world. And so I believe that my own life is such a testament of that, especially, I will say, as a woman of faith. Religion can be very male dominated when we talk about, patriarchy and religion, and to see a woman who is stepping into a role of leadership and authority in a space of faith, I think it gives women permission to not just be women of faith who have to sit in the background around who aren't allowed to have certain speeches and aren't allowed to do certain things, to say, you know what, I am absolutely a woman. I mean, in every sense of the word. I'm not pretending to be a man. I'm not trying to be someone I'm not. I am a full-blown woman up here with a wig falling off. Okay? This is a woman up here, but I am also bringing a power that is completely different than what you may have seen from other men speakers. Not about comparison, it's about duality. And the beauty of duality is when we don't just experience one expression of power, but many expressions of specifically God's power showing up in the context of faith. But when we talk about corporate spaces and industry, there are just some perspectives that men in a boardroom alone cannot bring to the table. We need women of color, because they have a different type of power. And we cannot change industries or meet consumers and our people who are connected to the work that we do where they are with just one view of what it means to have power. And so I am hoping that my conversation is not the only conversation about women and power, but that other women with their own unique powers are able to combine with men and women alike to have a more broad version of what it means for us to be powerful.
If you enjoyed that, then make sure that you click right here, right now, so that you can enjoy the full episode.
When I got pregnant at 13, I just felt broken forever. I honestly felt like if I continue to look for the next anger high, I'm going to end up arrested. I'm going to